Recently, an atheist YouTuber made a response video to my video on the moral argument for the existence of God. The elevator pitch for that argument being, objective moral laws exist, therefore an objective moral lawgiver must exist. This atheist, who I'll call Rhino, based on his channel name, obviously disagreed with me. He titled his video, Apologist Accidentally Debunks Christianity. Oh no, I accidentally debunked my own faith. I didn't mean to do that at all.
I'm picking up your sarcasm.
Well, I should hope so, because I'm laying it on pretty thick.
Right off the bat, we see Rhino does not understand Christianity. Debunking Christianity would require proving that Jesus Christ did not rise from the dead. Even if my video failed to prove that objective morality is a thing at all, Christianity would still be true if Jesus was resurrected, and the Bible itself clearly agrees with that. If Jesus stayed dead after his crucifixion, then Christianity is bunk. Since that was Rhino's starting point, I was curious what he'd say in the rest of his video. After all, this was a first for me. Never before has anyone captured my entire video to do a scene-by-scene criticism of both me and my faith. And I gotta be honest, that really felt kinda like...
I must be doing something right.
Rhino's videos regularly criticize apologists like Greg Kokel and Mike Winger. Nice company to be in. I'm honored. Rhino didn't tag me, so I found out about his video when his fans started blowing up my comment section. Thanks for the extra engagement, fellas. Helps the channel grow. I know many of you guys watch my videos with your kids, so I'm not going to link to Rhino's video because it contains a lot of profanity and a few graphic descriptions of sexual acts. Now, atheists have commented on my videos before, almost always sharing their disagreements respectfully, but that's not how Rhino's crew rolls. Once his video posted, I was inundated with intentionally rude, condescending comments by a lot of anti-theists. Many opted for being as shocking and insulting as they could be. You won't be seeing those, though, because YouTube automatically blocks what it deems offensive comments. I got a slew of profanity, insults for me and my family, lewd sexual comments about Jesus, they really seem to enjoy those, and even a couple of veiled threats, all coming from the group claiming they have a superior sense of morality. I have been responding to the comments that were at least mostly cordial, but many keep asking the same questions, confusing the same terms, and making the same mistakes Rhino did in his video. So, this is my response to let you know what I thought as I watched it, point out what I think he got right, what he got wrong, and hopefully clear up some confusion. I'm not going to play his entire video, again, content, and for the sake of time. I do appreciate that he didn't edit my video to make it appear that I said something I didn't, and I'll be returning that favor, but he did continually misrepresent my claims and accuse me of holding views I've never even discussed. He also chopped out one of the most important parts of every video I make, the ending, where I say, eternity is on the line, and that lasts forever. I hope you choose wisely. I mean that when I say it. So, to Rhino and all his followers, I have a message for you. God loves you. You are made in the image of God just like all human beings, and I want the absolute best for you, which is for you to be a saved person and spend eternity with God. And to my fellow Christians out there, Jesus says we should pray for those who persecute us. So, that's what we're going to do right now. Father God, I pray for Rhino, whatever his real name may be, and all of his fans and the other atheists who visit this channel. I pray that your Holy Spirit would call them to repentance and open their hearts to the truth of how Jesus Christ died to save them because of your great love for them. I pray that the enemy's hold on them would be broken and that they would turn to you for their forgiveness and salvation. In Jesus' name, amen. On that note, I will be criticizing Rhino's views, attacking the faulty logic, but not Rhino himself. It's important that we combat ideas and not people. So, here we go.
Today, we're looking at a video from a relatively new channel that I just stumbled across called Thinking to Infinity, which appears to be run by our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ himself.
Haven't heard that one before. Also, Jesus was not a white guy. Rhino chose this screen grab of me for his thumbnail. Wasn't too flattering, but I did make that face, so fair game. At this point I was thinking he'd probably be a little snarky, but the bow tie gave me hope that he would take a scholarly approach and stay focused on the facts.
Expect disappointment and you will never get disappointed.
The thumbnail for this particular video caught my eye because it's asking if God is evil, a question that I have asked in my thumbnails in the past, and to which I have a pretty solid answer. But the answer that I've usually heard from apologists essentially dodges the question by either being incredulous at the idea of judging God in the first place, how dare you judge the Creator?
I've studied a lot of apologists, and I'm not aware of anyone who responds that way. There's nothing wrong with asking questions about God, especially since there are quite a few things in the Bible that do seem rather sus, until you examine them properly.
Context.
Or it tries to claim that it's impossible to judge God without assuming that God exists, because to judge him means we are assuming a standard of morality, and only God can be that standard.
The big question Rhino never answers here is, where does he get his standard for judging God as evil? We'll be revisiting that question a lot.
Neither answer addresses the fact that God is depicted in the Bible as behaving in ways that would pretty much universally be seen as evil if someone were to do things like that today. Given the fact that this guy is a Christian, I can guess that his answer to the question will be no, but I'm curious to see how he gets there, or if he even bothers with it at all. This could just be clickbait after all. The title of the video is Can Morality Prove the Existence of God? So this might just be a bog standard moral argument video.
He has a point here. The thumbnail is a little clickbaity, I admit. The topic and title of my video was, Is Objective Morality Proof for God? And this thumbnail does seem more suited to something like examining the events in the Old Testament that atheists point to for claiming that God committed evil, like the flood or wiping out the Canaanites, which atheists, neither of which were genocide. All those people were wiped out for their horrifically sinful wickedness, not for their ethnicity, race, political views, etc., etc. And God dealt out similar punishments to the Hebrews themselves when they engaged in the same behaviors. I am planning a video that goes into more depth on that. You should subscribe so you don't miss it. Rhino then plugs a Canadian charity called Project Share, and they provide a food bank and other services to their community. And I think that's good. Then there's his flaming logo and what sounds like some sick Yngwie Malmsteen riffs. Yngwie's kind of a guilty pleasure of mine. Hi everybody, I'm back.
Hi, back! I'm everybody!
This further made me think the video would be good-natured and have a sense of humor similar to my own. When I was a kid, I used to watch a lot of cartoons, and one of my favorites had a regular segment called Good Idea, Bad Idea.
Animaniacs. Good show.
Went something like this. Good idea. Taking a deep breath before diving into a swimming pool. Bad idea. Taking a deep breath after diving into a swimming pool. These were funny because good and bad are so obvious.
Sort of, but it's more about the subversion of expectations rather than just the bad idea being so obviously bad, though that is certainly a part of it.
This is where it starts to go off the rails a bit.
Everyone knows not to breathe underwater, right? But if you just say it's a bad idea to breathe underwater as a normal part of conversation, it probably won't be funny, it'll just be a weird thing for you to have said. But as for the subversion of expectations, in the good idea, bad idea setup, they're playing off of the PSA type of segment that everybody was used to. Explains why some people find things funny that others do not. Different people will have different expectations, so you can't poking fun at that format. You can have the bad idea move into the realm of absurdity while staying to subvert everyone's expectations in exactly the same way.
Impossible to get wrong. We all agree on what good and bad are, right?
No, we don't. And it's also a bit weird that you're talking about something that is so obviously based on subjective preferences as an example that you seem to be trying to use to get us to the conclusion that morality is not based on subjective preferences.
Yeah, I'm actually making the point that most people consider the concepts of good and bad to be simple and intuitive at face value. Then I present evidence that they're often more complicated than that. Rhino responds here as though he thinks I should have exhaustively presented every reason these gags are funny, considering all possible opinions of all people. But that would be unnecessary for making my point, and quite frankly, pretty boring.
For instance, one of the good idea, bad idea bits was about skiing in the Alps.
Good idea.
Going alpine skiing in the winter.
Bad idea.
Going alpine skiing in the summer.
Now, someone who is not familiar with alpine skiing might find that to be amusing because the idea of skiing in the summer is a subversion of expectations. There are plenty of resorts in the Alps that offer summertime glacier skiing. So in this case, skiing is not obviously a bad idea to everyone, and what's more, don't like skiing, so skiing under any circumstances will be seen as a bad idea. People might think it's worth the risk, and those people definitely exist. Skiing in the summer is so obviously a bad idea, right? My point is that the example that he chose as a thing where everyone always knows the good and the bad with no gray areas is actually not that simple, and there are plenty of gray areas.
Yeah, that was the point of my intro. Concepts of good and bad seem simple, but are often more complex. You remember that kid in school who, when somebody mentioned the sunrise, they'd say, "Well, actually, the sun doesn't rise at all. The perceived emergence of the sun above the Earth's horizon occurs due to the axial rotation of the planet at a speed..." Yeah. We get it, Dustin. Before I made this video, I gave this exact talk to several different groups, multiple times, and received rave reviews from attendees and presenters as well. They all caught on to this setup just fine, yet it seems to be eluding Rhino. And I don't think he's that dense. He's clearly an intelligent guy. I think he is a reflexive skeptic, someone who automatically opposes or dismisses an argument without evaluating its merits. Unlike a thoughtful skeptic, he denies my claims more out of instinct than reason. He knows I'm a Christian, so before I've even said anything, he's already in deny and oppose mode, determined to naysay pretty much everything I say. It's knee-jerk contrarianism, always taking the opposite position because of a pre-existing belief. As you'll see later, he even treats my humor as arguments to be dismantled, even though it's kind of similar to his own. He allows himself metaphors, turns of phrase, and humor, yet seems to take everything I say hyper-literally, then tries to dismantle it from every angle, and then smugly acts as though he's debunked it. But when it comes to education, politics, sexuality, we human being people persons regularly disagree on what's good and bad.
Some of us even disagree as to whether some of those things should have been included on a list of things that have a moral value assigned to them in the first place. Sexuality, for instance, is not a moral question.
What is a moral question to Rhino then? And even if that is his view, sexuality intersects with major moral issues all the time. Faithfulness, commitment, consent, exploitation, deception, selfishness. I could go on, but the fact that some people would disagree that sexuality even belongs on a moral list only supports my point. People disagree on this stuff.
Rather than argue the nitty-gritty about this sort of thing, the most practical approach is typically something along the lines of, your right to swing your fist ends at my nose. You are allowed to believe whatever you want about morality, but you may need to rein in some of the actions that result from those beliefs if they start affecting other people.
And now, by his own definition here, sexuality could only be morally neutral if it only affects one person. Yet Rhino gives no reason for how he came to that conclusion. Based on what standard? It's just his ungrounded opinion, yet he thinks we should all agree with it. Take abortion, for example. Yeah, we're jumping right into the deep end of the pool. Some say it's good and right to care for and defend women with unwanted pregnancies, show them compassion and kindness by terminating the pregnancy and giving them their lives back. Others say, no, it's good and right to care for and defend innocent unborn human beings, show them compassion and kindness by not letting them be killed.
That's a very dishonest way to frame this, don't you think?
Nope. Again, Rhino misses the point. I intentionally said, some people say. Then I compared that to an opposing view using that same language. I didn't claim or imply that these are the only reasons people vote pro-choice or pro-life, just some people say this, and some people say this.
It's not about getting rid of an unwanted pregnancy to give someone their life back, though that can certainly be part of the equation. It's about bodily autonomy.
For some people, though the leftist accusation that pro-lifers just want to control women's bodies is a complete straw man. No pro-lifer agrees with that. Bodily autonomy is also, in my opinion, one of the weakest reasons for being pro-choice, as the developing human being in a mother's womb has its own DNA. That human is not the mother's body.
If one of my kids needs a kidney transplant and I'm the only viable donor, I am within my rights as a person with autonomy to say no, even if it results in the death of my own child.
You really just say that?
This is not an apples-to-apples comparison. Not donating a kidney is doing nothing, and then a death results. Abortion is committing a willful act to end the life of an innocent human being. Very different.
I am very much of the opinion that every baby deserves to be a wanted baby. I would much rather never have been born than to have been born in a home where I wasn't wanted, where my parents were resentful of my very existence.
Rhino's entitled to his opinion here, and there are people who agree with him. But there are also many abortion survivors and victims of childhood poverty and abuse who say the opposite. They're glad to be alive. Here's one.
I was born into a really bad and negative childhood. I went on to thankfully be adopted and put into a better place. And I realized that with the people that are pro-choice, they think it would have been better for me to not have been born because of the torture that I went through being a kid. but I am really happy that I'm alive.
Neither Rhino nor anyone else has the right to say another human being's potential circumstances make them less worthy of being born. And, like the human flourishing argument we'll address later in the video, it begs the question, what level of physical ability, mental capacity, socioeconomic status, or level of wantedness qualifies someone for being born? And why is Rhino's metric the right one? We're already knocking on the door of eugenics, which is where this way of thinking always leads. The Germans even had a term for it. Liebenswertes Leben. Life unworthy of life. Rhino then goes on a lengthy, one-sided tangent about medical issues he thinks abortion is the ideal cure for. But embryology and common sense agree that human life begins at conception. So, when is taking the life of an innocent human being, especially a child, morally acceptable? If you were dying, but could save yourself by taking the life of an innocent 3-year-old, would that be morally acceptable? Would it make it more morally acceptable if it was your own kid? Would it be morally acceptable if that innocent child was in a different location, or at an earlier stage of human development?
How about no?
And yes, adoption is a thing, but there's so many problems with the adoption process that I'm just not comfortable recommending that as an option in this case, even if we ignore the fact that carrying a pregnancy to term causes irreparable damage to your body, and so forcing someone to go through that when it's not necessary is just callous.
Notice, abortion garnered a lengthy diatribe of support from Rhino, with no mention of any negatives. Yet, adoption was immediately shrugged off just because the process has problems. Pro-abortionists continually misrepresent the biological process to make their case. Whether you're a creationist or an evolutionist, pregnancy is a normal biological function necessary to the continuation of our species. Focusing only on the negative physical aspects of pregnancy, pretending as though it's similar to a debilitating disease, or referring to the unborn as parasites, is always inaccurate and dishonest.
You're making it sound like abortion is murdering people for the sake of your own convenience. Which, sure, you probably honestly believe that, so maybe your framing isn't dishonest per se, but it is uninformed to say the least.
Yep, around 99% of all abortions are performed as a means of birth control, for convenience.
I fully understand the perspective that a fertilized egg is a full-blown human being complete with personhood and a soul, and honestly, that's a difficult position to argue against. After all, if that were actually the case, then nearly all of the health effects that I mentioned earlier would wind up being a case of killing babies for what are, in this view, relatively minor benefits. But as the Bible is silent about the moment a soul enters the body, I feel that deferring to the Jewish tradition is warranted here, given that Christianity grew out of Judaism, and of course there are all those Judeo-Christian values we keep hearing about in American political discourse, right? So clearly Christians will respect the Jewish values that their religion is based on, right?
Okay, the errors here are A. Rhino assuming that the Bible has nothing to say about the unborn being alive, but Jesus and John the Baptist were both described as being alive well before they were born. Most scholars agree that the timeline in Luke shows that Mary was less than 1 month along in her pregnancy when she visited Elizabeth, who was 6 months pregnant. Many scriptures, even in the Old Testament, say that God knew us before and as he knit us together in our mother's wombs. And B. Rhino assuming that a minority of non-biblical Jewish writings should be considered as authoritative for Christians. Very few Jewish writings claim that life begins later than conception. The majority of Jews and their writings throughout history, along with the first-century Christians, like the ones who wrote the Didache, explicitly condemned abortion as being sinful. And Jesus himself regularly corrected early Jews for their incorrect views on morality not being strict enough. And here is where I realize I've allowed myself to get derailed. My video wasn't about abortion at all. It's a good lesson though. It's important to keep faith-based conversations with anti-theists on topic, or they tend to meander all over the place and drag you along, having you play whack-a-mole with random subjects rather than addressing the one you started with. So, I'll try to keep this on point from here on out. What about sexuality? Some say it's good to support all consensual sexual expression. Allow people to love and be loved on their own terms so they'll feel valued and fulfilled.
It's not just about the feeling of being valued and fulfilled, it's about not being the target of bigotry and discrimination.
He goes off on another tangent here, as though I was supposed to include every possible argument about sexuality. But it's true that some people say this, and some people say this. I intentionally didn't defend or support either view I presented here, yet, again, Rhino's reflexive skepticism causes him to miss the entire point of this section and just debate his preferred side. Others say no, It's good to reserve sexuality for monogamous husband and wife relationships, building secure, loving families and avoiding disease so people will feel valued and fulfilled.
Here's the thing, though. One of those views works for everyone if it is universally applied, while the other one causes trauma, mental health issues, and suicide.
Not true. He's ignoring the societal harms associated with his preferred side of this example. Research abounds that refutes his statements, and for just one such reference, the book Correct Not Politically Correct is rife with data on this topic. It's purely academic as well, with 0 Bible verses needed. Everyone's claiming their point of view is the good one. Their point of view is the right one. So how do we really know what's right and wrong? It's not as easy as good idea, bad idea.
Actually, in this case, it literally is.
Rhino apparently doesn't see how he just contradicted his earlier statement claiming my good idea, bad idea example doesn't work concerning morality. He seems to think his views are simple and obviously good, while any opposing view is obviously harmful. Again though, he's proving my point. There are many people who disagree with him, who likewise will point to studies, data, and anecdotes to support their views. So, how do we know who's right?
Good idea. Allowing everyone to love whomever they fall in love with, presuming reciprocation and that everyone involved is a consenting adult. Bad idea. Causing 7.6% of the population of the United States, about 25 million people, a bunch of mental health issues resulting in things like PTSD and suicide because you think their preference is icky.
And that would be another straw man argument. The people who support Christian marriage, which is remaining celibate until marriage, and marriage being one man and one woman for life, they don't hold that view because gay equals icky. I know I certainly don't. There are also studies that show the mental health and suicide rates of people with alternative sexual lifestyles don't improve in the secular countries where the religious right has no presence or clout on these issues. Most people think of goodness like a sliding scale. On one side, we have the baddest of the bad, kicking puppies, voting for Hitler, and all the sequels to The Matrix.
Ironic list coming from someone who I feel safe assuming voted for Orange Hitler.
There it is. This is a telltale mark of someone indoctrinated by political propaganda. On the left, they assume if you don't agree with them, you must be a bigoted, racist Fox News watching Trump bootlicker. Odd how they insist on everybody being binary. And on the right, they assume that if you don't agree with them, you must be a communist CNN watching pedo who wants to destroy the country. Politically indoctrinated people can't comprehend how many people don't fit into either category. There are gay conservatives like Dave Rubin, and there are anti-trans movement trans people. Rhino conveniently ignores how later in my video I put Big Bad Orange Hitler and Biden in the same lineup with Pol Pot, Mao, Stalin, and that one guy. But that didn't fit his binary narrative, so that got ignored. On the other side, we have the goodiest of the good. Chocolate milk, free chocolate milk, and unlimited free chalky milk. But hold up, says my buddy Carl. I hate chocolate milk. Carl places it on the other end of the scale, because milk gives Carl the bubble guts.
That's actually not a terrible analogy when you consider what we've been talking about thus far. You are sitting there saying that being LGBTQ is wrong because you like plain old-fashioned white milk. Gotta make heterosexuality the boring choice, obviously, so we can't stay with chocolate milk. But Carl is gay. He likes champagne mimosas, and the idea of being with a woman just gives him the bubble guts. This is just a fact about his life. He can't change it about himself, but you are legislating that he must drink white milk or else he can't drink anything for his whole life.
Nope. I'm just presenting the difference between subjective and objective morality. Preference, taste, and opinion versus universal fact. Though, it is worth mentioning that despite numerous studies, there is no proof that sexual orientation is innate or connected to biology in any way. Purely scientifically speaking, nobody is born that way. Is morality also subjective?
Yes. Without the existence of subjects to which moral judgments could be applied, morality would cease to exist. Morality is itself dependent upon the existence of subjects in order to exist. Ergo, it is necessarily subjective.
Okay. Without subjects, subjective morality would cease to exist. Makes sense, but follow me here. This is like the question, if a tree falls in the forest but nobody hears it, does it still make a sound? Technically no, because sound only exists as our brain interpreting our ear's response to air pressure changes, aka sound waves, from the tree falling. But technically yes, because those air pressure changes, or sound waves, still exist, even without a set of ears nearby to interpret them. This is why, even if every subject, or person, on the planet agreed that torturing puppies for fun was a good idea, they would all be wrong. And even if no people existed anymore, torturing puppies for fun would still be a bad idea. I found it really surprising that Rhino and the other atheists trolling my comments completely misunderstand the difference between subjective and objective, which tells me I probably could have explained this part better in my video, so I'll offer another illustration here. The 25 mile per hour speed limit on my street is objective. If you want to know what that is in kilometers per hour, just ask somebody from a country that didn't go to the moon. That speed limit applies to all drivers, regardless of their personal, subjective opinions of what it should be. Each driver still has their opinions about that speed limit, but their opinions do not change the objective law. If you drive faster than 25 miles per hour, you are breaking that objective law. Now follow me. Just because a human being people person, or an entire group of them, decided what that speed limit will be based on their opinions, that does not make the law subjective. Otherwise, the word objective would be completely meaningless and useless. Now, if you were to drive on one of those world-famous sections of the Autobahn which has no speed limit, each driver's subjective opinion dictates their maximum speed. You can't break a speed law there because there isn't one. And in the cosmic sense, just like in our physical world, objective laws require a lawgiver. There can be exceptions to objective laws though, such as when a policeman or an ambulance driver exceeds the speed limit on my street. They are not breaking the law because that law doesn't always apply to them. When atheists claim that God is committing murder by removing wicked people from the planet, they miss this entirely. God is not required to live by moral laws he put in place for humans. For instance, if you made AI robots and told them, you guys are not allowed to disassemble each other.
No disassemble!
Okay, but that does not mean that you, as their creator, no longer have the right to dismantle them yourself. This is the importance of what I call examining our world from an eternal perspective. Our mortal lives are just short little insignificant blips, and eternity is eternal. This life, one little drop of water. Eternity, all the oceans in the world, times infinity. God is most concerned with where we're going to end up after this short life is over. And he, being all-knowing, knew if those groups of people in the Old Testament would spend eternity apart from him or not. Moving them to their eternal destination sooner, instead of allowing them to commit more evil acts and just keel over from old age or some future war, achieved a few results. It stopped their evil behavior, it prevented them from hassling all the people God knew would choose him in the future, and it got them to their eternal state a little earlier. Now, let's raise the stakes. Imagine a country. We'll call them the People's Republic of We're Gonna Kill You. They decide to invade another country to take their resources and enslave their people. Free stuff and a free labor force. That's good. But the other country, We'd Rather You Not Extend, says, no, that's bad. It would be good to let us live our lives in peace. If morality is subjective, what determines who is right? What's the tiebreaker here?
To oversimplify, look at the two options and figure out which one will have the biggest increase in net well-being and decrease in net harm.
Incorrect. There's a greater population in We're Gonna Kill You. If their economic state is dismal enough, more human beings will starve and suffer if they don't overtake the smaller country. So, Rhino's answer is actually supporting the aggressor's side here. Power, violence, oppression, might makes right.
Now, you've got our systems mixed up. You see, I am looking at what would be the biggest benefit for the most number of people.
Yeah, that's them. The bigger country, with more people. Rhino's system is the same one slavers used in 1800s Great Britain to argue against emancipating all the slaves. They claimed the majority of people and industries would be negatively affected, potentially bankrupting their entire country, and only a small minority of people would benefit. Christians like William Wilberforce, however, based on their biblical worldview, famously combated that idea by declaring that no gain or loss metric could ever outweigh the evil of enslaving other human beings. And I know the atheists are chomping at the bit to say God commanded slavery in the Bible, but hang in there, we'll get to it.
But you say that God's rules are the good ones because God said so, regardless of the harm that his rules do to people.
This is assuming that an all-knowing God couldn't possibly have an end goal in mind that could be anything greater than the majority of human beings living happy, comfortable lives on Earth for this short little time here. But the Bible is clear that God desires a certain caliber of people to choose to be with him for eternity. He knows most people won't choose him, but the end positive result is still worth it to him.
Even setting any of our earthly moral disagreements aside, Jesus said in Matthew 7:13-14 that more people will go to hell than to heaven, so any system of morality that bases itself on Jesus is obviously not one that will result in the best outcome for the largest number of people.
Again, assuming that getting a greater quantity of people should be more important to God than the quality of who spends eternity with him. The strongest gets their way because there's no standard of right and wrong above opinions.
And using God as a standard doesn't get you away from that. God's opinion is right, anything that disagrees is wrong, and he'll get his way because he's the strongest and will throw dissenters into hell. In order for morality to be truly objective, it cannot be based on God. It would have to be external to God, and God would have to work within its parameters in order to be a perfectly moral being. As soon as you base it on God himself, that removes the objectivity and makes it a matter of God's subjective opinion.
Yet another common mistake made by atheists. God's morality, as stated in my video, is based on his character, his very nature. If God had DNA, his morality would be written in it. It can't change any more than I can change my blood type just by willing it to be different, or because I'm in more of an AB negative mood that day. God's moral law is objective because it applies to all of us equally, and it's a reliable standard because it is unchanging. More on that later.
I know apologists try to get around this by saying it's not God's opinion, it's God's nature, but that seems rather nonsensical. If it's God's nature and his nature is controlling him in a way that allows him to potentially have a difference of opinion between himself and his nature, but his nature forces him to side with it over his own opinion, then God's nature is just another way of saying that morality is an external force that God has to submit to.
This is what's called a category error. Our nature is not some external force that we have to submit to. It's a description of our existing characteristics. We don't have to submit to the identifying factors about us, and neither does God. Subjective morality is survival of the fittest, and most ruthless.
No, it absolutely is not. Survival of the fittest is a biological term related to evolution, which apologists misunderstand all the time, likely on purpose. It's not fittest as in strongest and most able to win in a direct one-on-one fight, it is fittest as in the best fit in an environment.
Apologists actually get this just fine. Atheists just don't like the implications of it. That's why Darwin himself titled his famous book, On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. That is precisely why evolutionists claim human beings wiped out the Neanderthals. Just substitute humans and Neanderthals for these two countries. Back to our milk analogy. Carl and I might disagree on milk being good, but what about the statement, milk contains lactose? That statement is objective. It's based on the object itself.
Do I bother pointing out that milk doesn't automatically mean cow's milk?
Something tells me you're gonna.
And could mean other things like goat's milk or almond milk that do not contain lactose?
Goat's milk contains lactose. So it really doesn't matter what I, or Carl, or anyone says, when they say it, or where they say it. Even if the entire world agrees that lactose is just a myth, if Carl drinks that glass, the next thing he'll be doing is praying that big handicap stall in the bathroom isn't occupied because it's bubblegut-mageddon.
Okay, but your analogy isn't really working here because the goodness or badness of the milk is still a subjective affair. If you are someone who is lactose intolerant, then sure, milk that contains lactose will have some bad outcomes, but the people who are not lactose intolerant are still free to enjoy it. What's more, I know plenty of people who are lactose intolerant, but frequently subject themselves to, bubblegut-mageddon?
Missing the point yet again. Lactose's presence in mammal milk is an objective fact, and a person's subjective opinion on the results of drinking it doesn't change that. But is there an objective standard for morality that transcends culture and time and opinions?
Sort of, but not really. When push comes to shove, morality is mostly just based on our subjective opinions. It just so happens that since we are a social species, the selection pressures during our evolution favored people who tended towards empathy.
I address this later in the video too. With this view, if morality is merely an evolutionary byproduct, then it's totally arbitrary. So if evolution had resulted in a human race that instead favored selfishness and greed, then those things would be good. To identify objective morality, we're going to need two things. First, a clear standard, not evolving morality.
Okay, I can do that. Maximize well-being, minimize harm. With some caveats, of course, but that's the basic standard.
Yeah. Remember this? That's like a football game where everybody's making up their own rules and the goalposts never stop moving. Pretty fun to watch, probably, but guaranteed chaos.
Interesting comparison, as a football game that does have a standard set of clear rules is still a matter of not just subjectivity, but arbitrariness.
Here we go.
There is no inherent footballness of the universe that dictates objectively what constitutes a football game. Kicking a ball into a net is not an objectively good or bad thing in and of itself, but in the context of a football game, into the net is an objectively good thing for you to do. Because as it turns out, the game known as football is a different game depending on where you are. That's another layer of arbitrariness that does have some objectivity attached to it.
Any game with both unreliable rules and an unreliable rule keeper is gonna be chaos. Second, we need a reliable judge who gets the final say on interpreting morality.
I can see why that is something that you would want, but the problem is it's not practical to expect that, and it's rather irrelevant to boot. If morality exists the way you claim it does, where it's some external force dictating right and wrong, then that will be a thing that exists irrespective of the existence of a reliable judge.
Another category error, but an understandable one to make if you're thinking about God as though he's a human judge, which he's not. Since his morality is part of his nature, he is both the source of the objective moral law and the judge who presides over it. Back to our AI robot example. God is that creator who instructed his robots to behave as he does, with exceptions that certain behaviors are reserved for him alone. And he's also the one who decides whether his creations are adhering to his instructions or not. Simple. We human being people persons clearly are not up to that task. Hitler thought genocide and world domination was good.
Kinda like Old Testament God, who constantly commanded the Israelites to commit genocide in his name and promised Abraham that his offspring would achieve world domination.
As mentioned, it wasn't genocide, it was punishment for committing evil. And Abraham was not promised world domination. He was promised a great number of descendants and that the entire world would be blessed through them, meaning Jesus Christ would be born into his lineage and provide the means of salvation for everyone on earth. But don't just blame him. He only got as far as he did because millions of people agreed with him.
Yep. And using my standard of maximizing well-being and minimizing harm, we can say that Hitler, and those that agree with him, Bible God, are objectively wrong.
Is morality also subjective?
Yes.
Funny. Here, Rhino says Hitler was objectively wrong, yet elsewhere said objective morality doesn't exist. And Rhino's standard actually supports that particular regime, depending on the circumstances. What if the Germans had won? Just like humans wiping out the Neanderthals, it would completely shift the balance of who even gets considered for maximizing well-being and minimizing harm. Throughout history, people all over the world thought slavery was a good idea.
Including the people who wrote the Bible.
Hey, told you we'd get here. This topic deserves its own episode, so I'll try to keep this short. First, in his video, Rhino goes through a long list of Bible verses that mention slavery. But, as I pointed out back in my episode on the bear attack in 2 Kings, atheists only use the translations that appear to paint God in the worst light. And the vast majority of biblical translations translate this word eved as servant in these verses, because it was not like the chattel slavery of the American South that modern Westerners think of. This same word is the one used to call Christians servants of God, and he obviously isn't forcing us to work against our will. In ancient times, the indentured servitude kind of slavery often worked as a way to pay off debts or avoid imprisonment or execution in war. Hebrew servant slaves were required to be freed after 6 years, and still had many rights under the law, and still received wages. In fact, most of those Bible verses are regulations about servanthood that protected or defended servants. A person or family serving under a master who provided them with food, shelter, and protection in exchange for work could essentially be receiving a death sentence in that desert environment if that relationship was dissolved. Sometimes people do bad things and mistreat other people, and that is not good. But just because there were rules about what to do when that happened, often adjusting for circumstances, doesn't mean it was an endorsement of that mistreatment. Much like how Jesus corrected the Pharisees in Matthew 19, who were justifying their wrong behavior based on the law of Moses, we see that just because a practice was regulated in the Old Testament, doesn't mean it got God's stamp of approval or was considered hunky-dory as long as it was done a certain way.
Context.
Do you know how many Bible verses there are condemning slavery? 0. There are none of them. It doesn't exist.
Actually, it does. In Exodus 21:16, the penalty for man-stealing, which is a parallel to the American slave trade, was punishable by death. You want to steal somebody to make them a slave? that would cost you your life. And it's not just that one. In Deuteronomy 23, it says, if an actual slave, not just a servant, escapes, you will not return him to his slave owner. He can choose where in your town he'd like to live, and you will not mistreat him. And many of the biblical statements about slavery and servanthood come with reminders to the Israelites about how they had once been actual slaves in Egypt, who were mistreated for centuries. So, they should show their gratitude for their freedom by treating others rightly. Like the Golden Rule in Matthew 7:12, which obviously challenges the entire idea of slavery. And in Philemon 1:16, Paul defends a slave and strongly urges his master to set him free. That's more than one verse, right? Some people point to world religions to explain morality, but can they pass the test? With Islam, Muslims say right and wrong are determined by their god Allah, who they admit is still capable of doing evil if he wants, but wrong actions become good simply because Allah does them. So morality is a moving target based on Allah's whims. No clear standard, and a judge who is not obligated to be honest with us about it.
I mean, to be fair, that actually sounds like a way more intellectually honest version of the typical description of morality that Christian apologists will give. It's divine command theory. God is the source of good, so whatever God does is automatically good, even if we would consider it evil, because God is the source of good.
There's some confusion here about Allah's capacity for committing evil. Popular thought among Muslims is that Allah can do anything, so he could spend all day committing the exact same sins that Satan does, but those actions would become good just because they were done by Allah. The difference is that God would not and cannot commit actions that go against his nature. Hinduism has a seemingly never-ending supply of gods and philosophies that often disagree with each other, and more than a few of those gods, like Krishna, are known for being deceitful tricksters. No clear standard, judged by deceptive gods and imperfect people.
But much more successful at explaining why the universe is the way it is. Why is there evil? Because gods are not omnipotent and some of them are malicious, that's why.
I disagree. Though that does align with a world where good and bad actions happen all the time, it doesn't explain why we all have this sense that there's something wrong with the way the world is. However, an originally perfect creation that later fell into sin, disorder, and chaos explains why we all point to bad things like war, famine, and meaningless tragedy and say, from the depths of our hearts, the world's not supposed to be like this. Buddhism emphasizes compassion, nonviolence, and mindfulness as ultimate good. Buddhism and Taoism have no gods per se, so their morality is determined by imperfect human beings, just like you and me, and just like every single Thailand Buddhist temple monk who tested positive for meth after a drug raid in November of 2022. And just like the Dalai Lama himself, who sexually assaulted a young boy in public in April of this year. So, those don't work.
We really gonna start using the behavior of religious leaders as an argument against that religion's ability to inform morality?
Yes, but I do think Rhino is justified for his concern here, so stay tuned.
I'm not sure what denomination this guy is, but there is a good chance that if he were to Google his denomination's name, followed by the word sex scandal, he will find multiple stories of prominent figures from his religion abusing children, having affairs, visiting prostitutes, or something else along those lines.
All right. I actually do not belong to any denomination, and no, that doesn't mean that I attend a big box Baptist church that's labeled non-denominational for branding reasons, and I also do not attend a charismatic megachurch labeled non-denominational. I belong to a small church that adheres to the New Testament model of church. But even with that, Rhino is still correct, because you can find a sex scandal in the pages of the New Testament, like in 1 Corinthians, where a guy was sexually involved with his own stepmom, though that was called out by church elders and punished. And in my video, I did acknowledge that people have done terrible things in the name of God, which includes a lot of people who call themselves Christians, but that God is the standard and judge of those actions and people. Thanks to Rhino, though, I do realize that I should have handled that section better, and I agree with him. I think it does seem like I was harder on other religions and kind of skipped over Christianity, especially Christian leaders. So, Rhino is right. There is no shortage of abuse and scandal to be found within the Christian church too. And why is because it is filled with human beings. If you investigate any group of human being people persons, you're going to find somebody doing something evil motivated by money, sex, power, or some combination thereof. And when that's done by anyone, especially a pastor or priest or even apologist, then the victims deserve justice and the perpetrators deserve punishment. God's eternal gift of forgiveness and salvation through Jesus can cover any sin and allow us to escape eternal separation from God, but that does not mean that any of us are exempt from the consequences of our actions here on earth. And the Bible seems to imply that eternal punishment will be far worse for false Christian teachers who victimized others. The difference between Christianity and those other religions I mentioned is that we aren't supposed to have human leaders over the entire church. Jesus Christ is the leader of Christianity, our one and only high priest, and we are all a royal priesthood under him. Yes, the early church had bishops, but the words Paul regularly used for officers of the church were synonymous with head waiter. Servant leadership is what Jesus always modeled and instructed for the church. When Christian leaders have harmed others, which has happened far too often, it's because they failed to follow Christ's example. We look to him for confirmation that Christianity is true, not imperfect human beings. There's Hollywood religion. No, not that one. You know, the one where good people go to heaven and bad people go to hell.
Oh, you mean a religious system that is actually fair and rewards good actions while punishing bad ones? Also, I find it amusing that you're using What Dreams May Come as an example of the Hollywood religion where good people go to heaven and bad people go to hell. The whole point of that movie is that it wasn't fair that Annie, Robin Williams' character's wife, went to hell simply because she died by suicide, not because she was a bad person.
More of the same. Who gets to determine what is and isn't fair? What constitutes being a bad person? And if you lived a bad life beyond your 40s, you might as well give up, because you simply don't have enough time left to outweigh all your bad deeds, right?
All Dogs Go to Heaven is even worse for your point. The very premise of that movie is—
Yeah, I'm going to stop you right there. That was just a joke. It's just to make people chuckle. It's the same reason I put a picture of the Notebook in my gun rights video. If there is a hell. Probably not, though, right?
Right, no hell. Because eternal torture for a finite crime, no matter how heinous, is immoral.
Based on what standard? As with our earthly justice system, the length of time someone is punished is not based on the amount of time it took to commit the crime, but the severity of the crime. And sinning against God is far more egregious than most people understand or want to admit. Also, hell is torment, not torture. Link here to explain that. How good is good enough for heaven on this view, though?
Well, if I had to steelman the position, if you lived your life in such a way that there was a net increase in well-being and decrease in harm as a result of your actions, then you get to go to heaven. If there was a net decrease in well-being and increase in harm, you don't.
Well, less good than you, obviously, because you're the hero of this story. How bad is bad enough to go to hell? Hitler or any character portrayed by Alan Rickman.
How dare you suggest that Dr. Lazarus deserves to go to hell?
By Grabthar's hammer. What a savings.
Yeah, that was a joke. And selfishly an opportunity to do my Rickman impression. I do know that he didn't only play villains, and slight spoiler alert, a few Harry Potter fans have taken issue with me putting Snape in that lineup at all.
The very concept of hell is itself immoral. Like, should Hitler have gotten away with doing what he did? Ideally no, but eternal torture without the hope of reprieve? Even for Hitler, that's a bit much. I'd say if he suffers equal to the amount of suffering that he inflicted upon others during his lifetime, that would be fair before blinking him out of existence. Now, isn't God good and just for taking the burden of judgment away from you so you don't have to make such difficult decisions with the less obvious cases? But I find it weird that I was able to come up with a less obviously flawed and immoral system than the God from whom I supposedly get my moral compass.
Okay. If you don't understand how bad sin is to a holy God, then it makes sense that you might think punishing it less severely would be more moral. If you were a judge presiding over a case where a guy drove a van down the sidewalk, you might think it's reasonable to let him go with a warning. But if you later find out that he ran over 20 people on that sidewalk, you'd realize your judgment wasn't just at all. Rhino's also missing that God, through his own sacrifice for us, is such a merciful judge that he's offering all of us a deal where he will pay the penalty for our sins so that we escape eternal punishment entirely. Some folks claim objective morality can exist without appealing to a higher power. Atheists like Sam Harris say we can base morality on human flourishing. Actions that promote the well-being of conscious creatures are objectively good. Actions that harm them are objectively bad.
Well, you're missing some key language in there, but yeah, basically.
That makes sense. Until it doesn't. Notice how Sam is smuggling in the exact concepts we're trying to measure. He's using the same scale. He's just swapping out good and bad for wellness and harm. We're right back where we started.
Okay, why is that a problem?
I guess it's actually not too surprising that Rhino isn't making the connection here, because he's been appealing to this exact system throughout the entire video, yet he somehow fails to see it's just one more ungrounded opinion that leads us right back here. Also, if the goal is the well-being of humans, doesn't that justify killing one healthy person to distribute their organs to 10 people on the donor list? I mean, more human survival, human flourishing.
No, it doesn't. That's some of the key language that you were missing. The net increase of well-being and net decrease of harm.
Yeah. 7 people live and 1 person dies versus 7 people die and 1 person lives. It's a net increase in wellness and a net decrease of harm, but it's still murder. After this, Rhino acknowledges that there are many unknown factors that prevent us from even knowing the net benefits from such an action. Then he says this.
So this is where the compassionate aspect comes in. If there are factors that are impossible to know, then do not take an action that causes harm directly, hoping that a future good may materialize if all the other factors work out perfectly, because in most cases, that's not how it will work out.
So, Rhino seems to agree here that his system fails to identify whether something is good or bad until it's already done and can be viewed in hindsight. Not exactly useful for instructing people on how to live morally. Or killing off the weak and feeble-minded who are just slowing down the human herd. We're not going to colonize Mars dragging all this dead weight around, am I right?
That's more than a bit disingenuous. I'm sure some people still exist who argue for eugenics, but as far as I'm concerned, well-being is not measured with whatever up metric got you to saying that going to Mars is more important than the experiences of actual human beings that have a disability, many of whom are productive members of society. This is once again where the compassion comes into play. I would argue that caring for those who cannot care for themselves is a good and moral thing to do because they are people who have experiences, so their well-being counts as well-being just as much as anyone else's.
Second verse, same as the first. Why is compassion good? Why is having human experiences good? Some people, like Rhino, thankfully, say it's good to allow disabled people to have human experiences. Some other people, like you-know-who, say disabled people harmed humanity, stopping all of us from achieving the best human experiences. Without an objective standard, it's just your word against theirs, and they're going to use the same exact benefit versus harm reasoning that you use. Oh, look how quickly human flourishing turns into eugenics. Human flourishing!
Only if you're not starting from a position that considers all people's flourishing to be equally valuable.
Which includes those people who disagree with you. They're using your same system. You guys just disagree on what human flourishing entails. You're just, to cite a previous example, putting each other's favorite kind of milk on the opposite ends of the scale. Which makes you wonder, who gets to decide what qualifies as human flourishing? And why prioritize conscious creatures? I mean, some conscious creatures think it would be good if we all die off and leave the Earth in peace. Who's to say they're not right?
I'm somewhat sympathetic to the antinatalist position.
Why am I not surprised? And what happened to all that compassion talk? Rhett McLaughlin is a popular YouTuber who famously deconstructed his Christian faith. When he was asked how he'd now teach his kids about morality without God, he said, simple. If you steal, you'll earn a reputation as a thief, and that will make your life worse. So, be a moral person, because that will make your life better. Huh. Well, that makes sense. Until it doesn't. Because if atheism is right, Rhett is wrong. If God doesn't exist, it's best to be a thief who doesn't get caught and doesn't feel bad about it. Then you get the free stuff and keep a good reputation.
Maybe, but the fact of the matter is that thieves get caught frequently enough that you could never guarantee that you wouldn't be one of the ones who gets caught.
Notice here he's dismissing my point about a philosophical truth that doing what is best for your own quality of life and self-interest is ideal with an atheist worldview by pointing to potential real-world risks that, according to Rhino, most thieves get caught. But how does he know that? That's like those online banks that claim they've never been hacked. No, you've just never caught anyone hacking you. The likelihood that you might get caught doesn't change that being a thief, adulterer, or even murderer who doesn't get caught and has no remorse for those actions can be a net gain for you as an atheist. If Christianity is true, though, even if you get away with all your crimes here on Earth, and they somehow improved your quality of life, you'll still be punished for them eternally apart from Christ. An adulterer who doesn't get caught? More sex without losing your marriage, murder your annoying boss, and keep your job. Be a child molester and continue your reign as the king of pop. Live your best life now. Harvey Osteen. And with an atheist worldview, that's just fine.
Except atheism isn't really a worldview.
Sure it is. Atheism is the belief that there is no God, and that informs one's beliefs on what exists, what is true about the universe, the purpose of life, and how we should live. And that's a worldview.
The worldview you're describing seems to be one that would start with the assumption that everyone has antisocial personality disorder. Since most people do not, we can dismiss that worldview outright. Turns out, most people have empathy and act kindly towards other people because they want to, without really getting into the philosophical weeds as to why.
Perhaps because they've been influenced by the Judeo-Christian values that have shaped the Western world and promoted more rights and better quality of life for more people than any other belief system or social structure? Perhaps. There's no God waiting to judge us. We're all just careening towards the eventual heat death of the entire universe anywho.
Never really understood why apologists keep bringing up the heat death of the universe. Like, yeah, that's a thing that'll happen, but who the f cares? It's like they think that if something isn't eternal, then it isn't important.
Apologists mention it because it's a good way of illustrating the lack of eternal consequence to the atheist belief system. Point being, with atheism, there is no ultimate net positive or negative to the entire existence of humanity, or even the existence of the universe itself. It won't matter one itty tidbit if humanity achieves world peace, or we blow ourselves to smithereens in the next 5 minutes.
Maybe not to the rest of the universe at large, but I'd be willing to bet that most human beings do not want to be blown to smithereens in the next 5 minutes, because they'd rather keep on existing. Why do you not take their opinion about their own existence into account here? Why is it an all or nothing? If the universe will eventually end, then nothing matters sort of thing to you?
That isn't factored into this illustration because their opinions on their existence don't change that, with atheism, there's no ultimate positive or negative outcome to the continuation or annihilation of humanity. Nothing really matters in the long run. It's just our selfish, me-first DNA staying alive until it inevitably won't. Like John Steinbeck wrote in The Grapes of Wrath, there ain't no sin and there ain't no virtue. There's just stuff people do. But that doesn't feel right to any of us.
Yeah, well, from people on your side, I keep hearing a lot about how facts don't care about your feelings or whatever, so
True, facts don't care about our feelings, but the point made is, why don't we feel like that Steinbeck quote is true if it actually is? Again, humans seem to have this innate feeling like the world isn't supposed to be this way. Similar to feeling hunger pangs because we innately know food exists that will satiate those feelings, we all long for and seek out ultimate purpose and meaning, like we're actually meant and able to find those things. We know murder, slavery, rape, child abuse are wrong, no matter when or where they happen, but without objective morality, we can't say that. We can't even say Hitler was a bad guy, just, not how I would have done it.
I really don't understand how you can even think that. Like, even if morality is purely subjective and changes from person to person, people still have visceral reactions to things like that. Sure, you can accuse them of being inconsistent if you want, but to pretend like this is a dichotomy where either Christianity is true or Hitler did nothing wrong is just gross.
Okay, but things aren't false just because they're gross. Likewise, people having visceral reactions to something doesn't disprove it either. You can claim all morality is subjective. Is morality also subjective?
Yes.
But this, no matter how distasteful, is the natural result of that way of thinking. But there's one option we haven't looked at yet. With Christianity, goodness isn't subjective. It's based on the character of the eternal, unchanging, morally perfect God.
So it's based on the character of a subject, making it subjective. How is that not subjective?
Please rewind to the section where I re-explain how a subject making an objective law does not make that objective law subjective. It's just basic vocabulary. More good equals more like God. Less like God, that's bad. Also called evil.
So torturing people for not worshipping me is good then, right? Because that's a thing that your God does.
Nope, that's a straw man. God does not torture anyone because being tortured is different than being in torment. And nobody goes to hell for not worshiping God, but because they sinned of their own free will. The just and fair punishment for sin is to be separated from God, who is perfectly holy. Video on hell linked in the description. And the only reason anyone escapes that just and fair punishment for their sin is by accepting Jesus' offer to save them from that punishment. Moving away from God in any direction is moving towards evil. Let's try this out. Is adultery more or less like God?
Well, God has never been married, according to Christians at least, but he impregnated a teenager that was betrothed to someone else at the time, so adultery is closer to God than not.
Atheist troll comments often come in waves, like they all listened to the same podcast and thought the host had a particularly zingy gotcha statement, then they take to the interwebs before checking the accuracy of what they're about to post. My comments have been flooded lately with the accusation that God impregnated Mary against her consent, or committed adultery since she was betrothed to Joseph, many even condescendingly adding, "You should read your Bible more." But in Luke 1:38, Mary clearly consented to being the mother of Jesus prior to becoming pregnant, and Joseph, in Matthew 1:24, agreed to be the human father who would help raise Jesus. Also, adultery is a betrayal of a relationship, whether physical or emotional. In Matthew 1:25 and elsewhere, it states Mary was still a virgin when she gave birth to Jesus. Her pregnancy was a miraculous event that involved neither physical nor emotional infidelity. God is perfectly faithful, so adultery is bad. Making people pay for the bad things they've done? He is perfectly just, so that's like God.
Except in this case, the bad things they've done didn't worship him, because according to Christianity, Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the worst serial killers in modern history, is enjoying eternal paradise without ever having paid for any of the bad things that he did.
I did already address his mistake about why people go to hell, but that's a great point about Jeffrey Dahmer. I have a whole video on that. Link in the description. But offering forgiveness and mercy whenever anyone sincerely asks for it? God is perfectly forgiving and merciful, so objective morality achieved!
Nope. You missed the fact that perfect mercy is incompatible with perfect justice, especially the retributive justice that you seem to be presenting by phrasing it as making people pay for the bad things they've done. If it's a system of people pay for the bad things they've done, unless they are friends with the judge, in which case they get let off the hook, then that is neither perfect justice or perfect mercy.
Right, but that's not what's happening here. Christians aren't being let off the hook just because they're friends with the judge. It's not injustice, because the penalty still gets paid. What Jesus did by dying on the cross paid the cost for every one of our sins, if we accept his deal, trust in his ability to save us, and live our lives as he asks us to. Either we pay for our sins, or Jesus does. But nothing goes unpaid. Perfect mercy and perfect justice. Christianity. An unchanging standard, the immutable character of an eternal God, judged by a perfect being, God himself. But wait, some might say, believers have done horrible things in the name of God. That is true.
Yep, and since you used examples of believers of other religions doing horrible things, not even in the name of their religion, just doing horrible things in general, as proof that their religion doesn't have the moral standard, we now get to dismiss Christianity on the same grounds.
I admit, I fumbled the ball on that section, but it doesn't negate Christianity just because some Christians did terrible things. If it was something that Jesus wouldn't have them do, it was wrong. But they don't get to judge if those things were good or bad. God does.
Yeah, but the problem is that he doesn't communicate with us about it.
Sure he does. You just don't like the way he's done it. He also judges if they were just using his name to justify the bad things they were doing. Guess how that's gonna go.
There's the rub. Nobody can actually know who is actually behaving in accordance with God's nature, because God hasn't shared his nature with us in any verifiable way.
Sure we can. That's the importance of studying God's communication with us, rather than just skimming and dismissing it. This is why less learned folks in colonial times tried to warp a few Bible verses to support their ownership of slaves. But those concerned with accurately understanding the whole of Scripture were willing to put their reputations, income, and sometimes their very lives on the line to abolish slavery. Rhino has an entire channel dedicated to combating Christianity, yet he doesn't understand even the most basic of Christian principles. When you only read the Bible to find passages that sound distasteful so you can support your bias, it's no wonder you find it so confusing.
So as a non-Christian, I look at all the Christian infighting and I have no way of figuring out who are actually following God's nature and who are just using his name to justify the bad things that they do.
That's actually kind of easy. For instance, Jesus said to spread the gospel, but love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And if people don't want to hear the gospel, then move on to the next group. So, anyone in history who used violence for the purpose of promoting their faith was wrong.
I mean, you could say that God wrote morality on our hearts, but then that just brings us back to the problem of subjectivity. My moral sense says that being bigoted against LGBTQ people is morally wrong. You clearly disagree.
No, I do not. I think bigotry is unacceptable. But I also believe I can disagree with someone's lifestyle and still genuinely care for their well-being. Rhino obviously disagrees with me on a lot of stuff, but does that mean he hates me? I hope not, even though some of his fans weren't at all shy about saying they did. And he's a reliable judge.
I mean, when the standard is his own opinion, how could he possibly not be?
Once again, God's nature is not his opinion. Why? Because God can't lie to us.
Ezekiel 14:9. And if the prophet is deceived and speaks a word, I, the Lord, have deceived that prophet. Whoops.
Whoopsie.
I love Ryan George. And
Context.
if you read this whole chapter, you'll see in this passage God is speaking about idol worshippers in Israel who are hoping to play both sides, worshipping pagan gods and idols, but then also still going to God's prophets to get advice. They were basically treating God like a fortune teller, and God does not like that. He says here that he will intentionally deceive these people as punishment for their evil actions. He also deceived Satan from knowing his plans about Jesus' crucifixion. And even Rahab was celebrated in Hebrews 11 for saving the lives of God's people by lying to the enemy. In fact, that 9th commandment doesn't say thou shalt not ever lie under any circumstances ever whatsoever, but that you're not allowed to say something happened that really didn't, or vice versa for your own gain. You can lie to the SS about the Jews hiding in your attic and still be a good Christian. His nature is goodness and truth. He's the source of those things. Those are components of his very existence. I'll explain. If you have a liquid and you make it so it's no longer wet, it's not a liquid anymore.
Oh, no, please don't. You have no idea what kind of can of worms you just opened with that one. Alright, fine. Pedants, go nuts in the comments about how liquids are not wet themselves, but they confer the property of wetness onto other things.
Rhino, buddy, I think that might be a sowing and reaping thing. If God could do something not good, he wouldn't be God.
To reiterate, the Bible literally says, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. That's Isaiah 45:7. The book of Job also explicitly credits God with doing evil things to Job in multiple places.
First, God is not credited with doing evil things to Job. Satan is clearly identified as the one who did all the bad things to Job and his family. The reason that was allowed is sometimes debated, but God was clearly the one who protected Job from losing his life and restored everything Job lost. Second, concerning Isaiah 45:7, if you again cherry pick your translation, then yeah, out of the many translations available, a very select few say, I create evil here. But most correctly translate the original Hebrew, which literally says, I form light and create darkness. I bring prosperity and create this word, which means calamity, hardship, and woe. Throughout the Bible, God brings blessings and cursings, and that perspective changes whether you're on his side or not. If you're the Israelites being set free from slavery, then the plagues in Egypt were a great blessing, a literal godsend. If you were the Egyptians, though, you'd consider those plagues to be evil, the worst calamity you ever saw. So whenever you've experienced something truly good in your life, that's because you got some God spilled on you. When we try to define goodness without God, it's like trying to explain the word wet while denying liquids exist.
Fun fact, we are actually incapable of perceiving wetness.
Skip.
Now, would you fix me a sandwich, please?
Yes, I will. And I'll spread a little common sense on the bread.
Any other attempt to anchor goodness falls flat with the simple response, says who? You? It's just your opinion against the people who disagree with you.
Well, most people can agree with the increasing well-being metric, and most people who aren't apologists arguing against it don't take it to the point of eugenics like you seem to think we do, which honestly says more about you than it does about me.
That really doesn't matter, though. Just because a large number, or even a majority of people agree on something, does not make it right. Remember this? Culture? Society? Which one? Ours? Victorian society? The Taliban society? It's just your opinion against theirs again.
Okay, so which Christian culture or society should we use? Southern Baptist? Catholic? Orthodox? Lutheran?
Yeah, denominations kind of blow. I actually agree with Rhino here. Denominations often confuse non-Christians and give this impression that truth within Christianity is just a matter of personal opinion or something that could never be known. Seems like a good move for Satan to use to cause confusion and keep people from finding the truth. But if Christianity is true, then finding salvation and eternal life is the most important thing you will ever do in your life. If you're not willing to dedicate just a little time to sort through the distractions and investigate it yourself...
All y'all disagree on pretty fundamental moral questions all the time, so who gets to say who's right?
Jesus.
Yeah, God or whatever, but that's not helpful when he won't speak up until after we're dead, and he's throwing a bunch of us in a lake of fire for choosing the wrong denomination while we were alive.
Okay. He came to Earth, he spoke a lot throughout history, nobody goes to hell for choosing the wrong denomination, and nobody goes to heaven for choosing the right one. The punishment for sin is hell, and accepting Jesus' deal gets you out of it. Our evolutionary programming, nature's social contract, survival of the fittest, man, Darwinism 101. Now it's just your opinion against whoever's strong enough to shut you up.
Nope. We are a social species, and as such, evolved a sense of empathy. I don't advocate for using evolution as a justification for morality, but it certainly does do an adequate job of explaining how morality developed in the first place.
Nah. Evolution shows that whichever behaviors get more DNA into the next generation wins. Whether that's by empathy or assault, doesn't matter to a biological process. You will never get out of this unending moral thumb war until you admit we all know murder, slavery, rape are wrong. Objectively.
Except in the Bible, God rewarded a guy who murdered an interracial couple for the crime of being an interracial couple.
I wonder if any of Rhino's followers actually bother looking up these verses. If you read more than just the verses he cites, you'll see that they were not killed for being an interracial couple, which even Moses was part of an interracial couple and he survived just fine. These people were executed for taking part in demon worship, which included burning children alive. That is why they died. After this, Rhino revisits those same verses about servants from earlier, and again makes this false statement.
And the laws about slavery explicitly allow it and tell slaves to be good and obedient for their masters, with not a single verse outright condemning the practice.
And they are only objectively wrong, not because we say so, not because society or evolution says so, because evolution says the opposite.
Evolution says nothing. It is just a process that happens.
I agree, though that certainly doesn't stop evolutionists from assigning agency to evolution or nature, acting as though it has intentional forethought, and then claiming the reason a particular animal developed a particular trait wasn't random, but was to achieve a particular goal. I digress. The point is, as previously stated, generational DNA transmission is what wins evolution, and in the animal kingdom and human history, that's often been accomplished through immoral behavior. But because those things are in direct opposition to the character of the good God who made us. Objective morality is evidence that God exists.
Well, even if I grant that, it can't be the God of the Bible for reasons that you yourself laid out, so thanks for disproving Christianity, I guess.
Again, despite all of Rhino's misunderstandings, I still could be wrong about all this stuff, but if Jesus rose from the dead, then Christianity is still true. The Bible says in Romans 2:15 that God has written his law on our hearts, and that our consciences confirm this. Rhino then mentions that his conscience tells him that his homosexual behavior is okay, and that God is evil. But this, again, supports the points I make in the video. We all have an innate conscience from God, but when we repeatedly sin despite our conscience, we reject his leading. And the Bible says, when that happens, God turns us over to our reprobate minds. Your conscience goes dark. God basically says, I gave you free will, and if you choose to ignore me and live that way, then I'll let you face the consequences. And when it feels good to do what's bad, your scale's messed up. That's where we get our inner sense of right and wrong. So when you feel guilt, or you're lying in bed at night thinking of that horrible thing you did 14 years ago, that's not an evolutionary glitch. That's God's programming alerting you that you violated his community guidelines. Rhino then describes a specific homosexual act that he says he doesn't feel any guilt about. He may have drowned out that conscience God gave him, but on Rhino's own website, I found several of his fans commenting about how they still constantly struggle with inner guilt. We should definitely continue to pray for them as well. Throughout the Bible, we're told that people will declare themselves wise and good based on their own definitions. But when they do this, they become fools. Like, not being able to identify what a woman is.
Oh, you transphobic piece of shit.
I thought Canadians were supposed to be nice. I've still never heard anyone on the trans side give an articulate answer to this simple question. As Rhino does here, they usually just opt for ad hominem attacks. And a phobia is an unreasonable fear of something. I have no fear of people who identify as trans, and genuinely want the best for them, but that doesn't mean I have to agree with them. Rhino then offered some links to some trans-supporting resources. I looked through them, but it's the typical slanted data that considers birth defects and aberrations to be completely separate categories of sex, which they are not, and entirely ignores the severe irreparable harm done to children with gender care treatments, which, as more data becomes available, is finally being acknowledged by more medical professionals, and ignores the confirmed dangers and attacks on biological women that the trans movement prefers to turn a blind eye to. Compassion indeed. They will call good evil and evil good. Why? Because they desire those things that are least like God, the things furthest away from Him.
That doesn't comport with your earlier statement about God writing morality on all of our hearts.
Sure it does. You have free will to ignore or reject Him and His morality. Sexual sin, selfishness, greed, pride. You can only travel so far away from Him before you have to either admit you're in the evil zone, or you stop, you turn around, and defiantly say, no, this is good, and that's bad. God is evil.
I mean, by your own metric that you've laid out in this video, yes.
More of Rhino communicating that he doesn't understand the case I made. A lot of that going on these days.
Oh hey, look at that, it's me! I'm famous!
You're welcome. No charge.
Okay, that's it for this one. He just goes into summary mode for the last 30 seconds or so.
Come on, man. That part is important. Seriously, Rhino, I genuinely care about you. I really hope that you will become a saved person. I hope that I get to see you in heaven someday, and that you get to spend all of eternity in complete fulfillment with Jesus. And that goes for every single person watching this channel, because eternity is on the line, and that really does last forever. So, I hope you choose wisely. I really do. And, keep on thinking to infinity.